power is in your hands. Yeah. What feels comfortable for you? I think the biggest danger is not showing up and just being completely apathetic about everything. I think actually you achieve more when you have an opinion, but to not have an opinion isn't a great standpoint these days.
Graham, thank you so much for joining me on Get a Shift On. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. How are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Graham, we've met on LinkedIn. We've had some great conversations in the past. For my viewers and listeners, can you just tell me who you are, what you do, and how we end up talking today?
Okay, so I'm a 54-year-old, young at heart, person who's always been interested in communication, did a degree in it in the early 90s, at the same time as doing a diploma in broadcast journalism, which I enjoyed immensely because it really taught me about how to be succinct with conversation. And I've pursued what good communication looks like my entire life, I believe, through being a sales director of businesses, from being a workplace needs assessor for many years, helping people with communicating to their organization what their needs are, right up to now, where I'm doing the whole comms piece stroke marketing piece with people.
Interesting. Communication is absolutely vital, isn't it, to everything we do? The verbal, non-verbal, the way we interact with everybody, I think is the one constant across the globe, irrespective of language. Can you sum up communication in one sentence?
Yeah, for me, can I sum communication up in one sentence? I feel it's, am I listening to you? And then, am I responding to you? So for me, communication is always starting with the other person. I feel like where comms goes wrong so often is that we put it from our perspective first. But I actually think that communication works best when we try desperately to understand the people that are in front of us. That's where we start the journey of communication. I think it's a complex thing, actually. So I don't think you can condense it necessarily into a sentence. But if I'm going to, I feel it's, am I listening to you? Am I responding to you?
Do you think that's where the difference between hearing and listening comes into play?
Absolutely. Yeah. And probably one of the easiest ways to think about that is music. I have a music podcast, which is successful as well. I've interviewed 600 guests on there now. And if we think about music, how often do we actually sit and listen to music these days compared with actually hearing music? And I think that so often people now have music as just background noise in their lives. And that can be said about all kinds of communication as well. Normally, when I talk to people about why things are not being effective on social media or why communication isn't being effective in the commercial space between internal parties or externally with other stakeholders, it's because they're just hearing it there, but they're not actually listening. They're not actually listening and then doing the responding to what is actually being said. So it's very easy to, if you like, be in a streaming-based mentality with all communications these days, where we are literally just digesting those little snapshots, but not actually taking the time to think about it, assimilate that, and then respond to it.
Yeah. I watched my daughter on TikTok the other day, scrolling. And it's not quite music, but it's very much the same thing. She's literally just scrolling. Scrolling. What was that about? Don't know, don't care. Just saw the title. That's all I needed to see. And I think that's very much what you're saying is we're so used to just that constant feed and drip, drip, drip that we can't stop and actually just listen to actually what's being said, how it's being said. And I think marketing certainly struggles with that as well, because it's trying to keep up with all of that very quick paced information that we're trying to take on because we're so used to it now. Really in-depth marketing is very different. Have you noticed a big change over the past few years with that?
In terms of marketing, I think marketing's actually taken the place of sales. I actually think marketing's moved forefront and center because marketing knows, or good marketers know, that it's all about storytelling and it's all about using those stories to cement trust with people. Sales are the ones that are having the hard time right now. And sales are having a tough time because still a lot of the company culture around sales from the C-suite and the board is centered around KPIs and what are you actually achieving here and how long is that going to take before we get the sale in through the door? And they haven't moved on that. They haven't shifted from that model. And that's difficult because that's not how sales works in 2026. If trust is now the currency of how we do business, and that trust is built upon relationship, and that relationship is built around spending quality time listening to people and getting to know people before you open your mouth and start selling, elongates the process. So marketing can sit in that space quite happily, but sales are struggling with that because they've still got to answer to when's it coming in through the door. And until C-suite start changing their perspective on that and understanding, actually, if I get a BDM into this business, a business development manager, or, which is a fancy word for salesman. No one calls them that anymore. That I give this person time to develop these relationships, then it's not going to work.
And say very much about BDMs because I'm pretty sure I've had that job title back in the days of employment. So
We all have.
what roles have you had in the past? Actually, we didn't really touch on that.
I've been self-employed more times than I've been employed, which is a good thing. I've also probably been in the great position of I've only been interviewed for a job once in my entire career. The rest of the time, the few times that I've actually been employed by somebody, I've either sold a company to whoever it is that I'm going to be working for, and I've been two pennied across, or I've been invited for a cup of tea. So it wasn't a formal interview as such. So that's lovely. And I think that actually that's the way it should be as well. Feel like, I know I'm going a little bit off piste here, but I do feel like I'm seeing right at the moment, some companies are really elongating that recruitment process and getting people to go for like 9 or so interviews. What's that all about? That's ridiculous. Surely you should have a better understanding of who it is you want to be fulfilling that role before you start. If you need 9 interviews to do it, then there's something actually wrong with your culture before you start. And I'd love to talk to you if you're listening. I'd love to talk to you as a company because you've got it wrong. But yeah, I've done sales-based roles. I've owned companies. I started at 11. That was my first company. I made pads. I won an Oxford Enterprise Award when I was young. I have had stationery companies, which I've then extended and developed into companies that have got a sales arm in electronic devices and also ergonomics and furniture devices. And I've done office design, fit out for large companies. I've developed software for companies. I've said earlier, I've worked as a workplace needs assessor, which means that I go and look at physical health, mental health, things like specific learning difficulties, neurodivergence with workers in the workplace, and typically through schemes like Access to Work, then provision is provided for them following a report by me. And now I run whatever this is.
Of that, whatever this is, I think that's such a good way of describing what you do. And I think actually how a lot of people feel It's that whole kind of, I've heard it said, what do you want to do when you grow up? Not a question I enjoy asking my children. And now I'm like, I still don't know what I do. What I feel, and I think you've touched on it there, and I want to come back to the interview thing in a second, because I think that's quite important as well. I do envisage a world where that won't be the case, where more people will be self-employed, and actually more of that portfolio type career, I think, is the way that people are going. And actually, if I was to predict the future, and I'm no Nostradamus, but I think that is the way that careers are going. I think people will have multiple streams of income. They will start somewhere and then build on it, because I just don't see people staying in careers for 20, 30 years. I had someone last night I was chatting to, actually, and she said, I've been in healthcare for 10 years. I'm feeling pretty burnt out. And actually, I look at it and go, I did 25 years, give or take. That's probably about right. But 10 years. And is that the trend we're going to start to see? Are we going to see people only doing 5, 10 years in a career before they build on the experience and look to go elsewhere?
I have quite a few friends who are in recruitment, and they will all tell you that, if you went back to like when we started in our careers, if you hopped from one career to another, it was seen very negatively. If you started putting on your CV that I've had like 5 jobs in the same time that I've had 5 dinners, people wouldn't look at that positively. But actually now it's not seen as a negative. As long as you can show your potential employer, the next person that you're going to, why you want to transition, and it's on a path of growth, then it's very understood these days. And I think the hardest thing has been for companies to accept it, especially at the top. I think it's hard for managers to accept that, why am I putting all of this effort into developing this person just so that they can leave and go somewhere else? But you should see that as success. If you haven't actually got to that mindset already, then you're doing something wrong. You should be wanting to help people go on to the next step in their career, unless you can offer that to them. So their choice is actually back on you, or the emphasis is actually back on you as an organization. Have you actually provided a route of success, continued success for this person that you're employing? Or have you actually just got a limit where, a plateau that they can reach, where they are going to need to move to get onto the next step? And it's, I now see people moving very frequently between jobs. Even my son, who's the only one of my 5 children who's actually got a job at this moment in time, because the rest are still in school studying. He's had 3 jobs already since he left university, but they've all been career steps, and it's all seen as positive. Okay. So he's come out of university, he's gone into special needs teaching. He's done his teaching qualification whilst he's been doing that. He's been promoted within that, and he's now moved back into the field that he studied at university, and he's a lecturer in film at Western College, which is great. But it's all been successful career steps. And I feel like education is one area where they've already got that culture because they understand that culture, but it hasn't transferred over into a number of businesses yet.
I think that the corporate world has a lot of catching up to do. Careers are changing, and companies that don't adapt will really suffer as this continues to change. I was one of those people who probably jumped from jobs too soon, some would say. When I was younger, I wanted to flip. I was absolutely very restless for lots of reasons. But it's very interesting when I look back on it now and understand why. But I was very much led down that path of education, university, work, promote, die. And that culture still very much exists. It'll be very different for our children and for grandchildren, but it is still there. And that's when I look back and I think, blimey, all those changes. And I had bosses when I said I wanted to leave who stopped talking to me. And it's such a shame, Because actually that then makes me feel bad. It wasn't until actually a bit further down my career when I said to a boss about leaving, moving on, they're like, great, good for you. What can we do? How can we support it? How do we facilitate you moving on? What have we done? What haven't we done? And it makes such a difference when people are like that, because
Doesn't
that
it?
is actually human nature. And I'm very interested in it. And when I look back, I think it's because I realized very early on that I probably wasn't designed to do one job. But 25 years ago, it was still fairly uncommon and it was hard for me. And now I realize that that's probably just the way I should have gone all along. So I'm all for talking about careers. I was at my old school a few weeks ago talking to year 8s about careers. And I do it here locally for the grammar school as well. Excuse me. And I kind of go in with a very different opinion that they are used to, because they're used to having someone from finance, the military, doctors who will come in and say, yeah, this is what we're going to do. I've been to university. This is what I'm doing. This is my career progression. I go in and I kind of blow that out the water and go, yeah, great. Go to university, do your education, but don't forget that in 10 years' time, you can do something else. You can go and be different. And I think that's so key. And actually going back to the communication of it all, I think that is being communicated more and more, certainly on platforms like LinkedIn. And what's your thoughts on how that is developing with what you see in communities and spaces like LinkedIn?
It's around what jobs look like and what a
And
career
how,
progression looks
and
like.
how careers are changing, and the communication that we're seeing. I think in days gone by, LinkedIn, for example, would have been that was basically your CV, and you wouldn't have seen much more beyond those job titles. And now it seems so different. And I think that is an evolution of society in itself.
I'm going to say I still think there's a lot of different opinion on that out there. Again, going back to the whole recruiter piece, I know that a lot of recruiters will say, be careful what you put on something like LinkedIn, because, if you're going to put stuff out on LinkedIn, potential employers are going to look at that and they're going to judge you based on your social profile. Now, your digital footprint is important going forward into a job. I'm not so sure. I'm not as certain that it's as straightforward as that, because I think it depends where you want to go for work. Now, if you're going to go into an organization who are always known for playing it safe and being politically safe at everything, then yes, that's the case. But actually, if you're a bit of a disruptor and you are seen to be a disruptor, and you're seen to be someone that pushes the envelope a little bit and pushes the agenda, there's probably still a place for you out there, because there will be people who are starting businesses who want to disrupt. So I think it very much depends. That the power is in your hands, yeah. But the power is in your hands in a way. I feel like you have to make the decision what feels comfortable for you, right? I actually think the biggest danger for anybody is not showing up. I think the biggest danger is not showing up and just being completely apathetic about everything. I think actually you achieve more when you have an opinion, right? Try and be good at communicating with that opinion. Try and listen to other opinions and not just push your opinion on everybody without listening. But to not have an opinion isn't a great standpoint these days. And I think that companies are looking for stronger characters, especially if they want exponential growth. Now, if you take the last business that I worked for was a tech, it was an ed tech. We had to go, any tech company, and I spoke to another guy that's just invented something yesterday, and I was saying to him, you have to now go for exponential growth. Tech companies can't sit around and wait for something to happen, because if you don't grow very, very quickly, somebody else will do what you're doing. They will come in and take it. So my last role was 3.5 years, and I only wanted to be there for a short period of time as well, because we had to, in that time, grow the company as quickly as possible. And that company went from, when I went for my cup of tea, there were 4 people in that company. And when I left, there were 174 people in that company. Okay. So it grew very, very quickly over those 3.5 years. We had to get investment in very, very quickly. We had to have very clear objectives, and we had to have a business plan that actually had an exit strategy on it very, very quickly into the life of the company. And this sort of thing never happened before. In the companies that we grew up in, no one would have gone, oh yeah, actually in 4 years from now, we don't want to be doing this anymore. The company doesn't want to be doing this anymore. We want to have exited out of here, or we want to be sold. We want someone to buy us. That's, and everybody remains, but within a bigger bubble. People weren't thinking like that. So it's very different.
Are you a disruptor?
Absolutely. What gave you that impression?
I wasn't sure. I just thought I'd better check.
Yeah. No, I like to think I'm disrupting. I've been pulled into roles to disrupt. And I think that's important. I feel like if you think about the last role that I went into, we were looking for a way of helping students with note writing coming from everybody in the C-suite. None of us wrote notes, but that made us the best people to do this, because what we saw was that most of the people that talked about note writing came at it from a kind of passion for note writing. But that doesn't help people who struggle with writing notes. Yeah. So if you sat me in a lecture theatre like I did years ago, and it took me a while, right? It honestly took me a while to understand this for myself. I think in my first year at university, I sat there and I intently tried to write and keep up with writing notes, and then realized that I'd learned nothing. And then I had to go and find ways of catching up with that information. And then by the time I got to the second year, fortunately, I learned shorthand as well as part of my journalism diploma. So that helped massively. But I also found ways of understanding information by just intently listening to information, and then finding more effective ways of remembering that information rather than necessarily writing it all down. And you suddenly realize, this is what's so brilliant about communication as well, is you realize that everybody on the planet communicates differently. It's what makes it so hard for management, is that we all assume in our head that everybody else, to some extent, communicates like us. And I can tell you from experience and helping people with this that isn't the case. I can give you an example of going to see somebody in a bank branch who just couldn't cope with the information they were being given every morning. And that's because they weren't an auditory learner. So the manager of that branch used to just do a shout out every morning for about half an hour, where they dictated everything that the branch staff were going to do for the day. And then this member of staff just always got it wrong. So guess what? I talked to her about how she learned information, and she goes, well, if it's written down, I can do it. So I started to get the branch manager to write it down, and then she never got it wrong. To assume is the worst crime that we can have in communication. We should never assume that anybody will receive what's coming out of our mouth, or what is being written by us, or what's being put in a video or drawn on a chart will be received in the same way that we see it. We have to have, here's the crux of the thing, we have to have communication about our communication. Yeah. How many people do that, David? How many people, before they start with a relationship with a new customer or supplier or whatever, actually sit down and talk to them about, how do you like to communicate? What works for you? Or do we just start by going, well, this is the system we use to communicate. Let's bombard you with emails or I'm going to send you a Teams invite because I'm using Teams. Well, I can't get Teams invites on my computer. All those things, those assumptions mean that communication will break down because we're not starting from the right place. We're not starting about talking about how we're going to communicate.
And I think people have been nervous about asking those questions because it goes against the grain. What is it that you think has changed to allow that communication to take place and for us to be more open and understanding of different perspectives and different learning styles?
Two main changes, I'd say. COVID changed a lot. I don't think it started as many things as people think it started. I think it expedited things that were already beginning to happen. So it's seen a massive investment in technology around communication that has enabled people to communicate more effectively in different ways. And because we've got these different channels of communication now, so many of them, in fact, companies are beginning to have to look at what's actually the right way to communicate. Okay. It was a lot simpler back in the day. I mean, when I first started doing business, people actually still sent letters. Right. You wrote a letter to people in a company. Imagine that.
Crazy.
We didn't have email. Fax came in, in the middle of me working. We had pagers, which were the beginning of the end because it was the first communication aid, really, that meant that you couldn't escape, right? That people knew where you were, all right? Although people just ignored their pagers, so it was okay. We've had smartphones that mean that you're on 24/7 and available 24/7. Email, which is the bane of everybody's life, but also for some people, the most productive tool for them as well. So, but I think that COVID pushed that technology on. The investment was huge. I mean, what was it that Zoom made? 180 billion or something in the year that COVID happened. And just think what that does in terms of how that infrastructure then gets better. And then I think the other thing is a better understanding of difference. And I feel better, especially around the neurodivergent piece. I feel like the discussion and the topics around, how do we neurodivergent individuals within the workplace in the last few years that have really become frontmost and center have now started people thinking, oh, actually, not everybody thinks the same out there. Yeah. So I think those two things have really kind of pushed the agenda forward. And now I think we're really beginning to understand, are the ways that we've been doing things actually right? Or actually, is it as complex as every individual that works for us possibly has a different way of thinking and a different way of communicating? And my word, does that mean we actually have to understand every individual? Well, actually, yeah, it does. It's hard. It's really hard for managers. I feel like it's such an education piece now because, again, when you and I first started, you were probably told, look, if you're going to go and work for Mr. Baines down the road, right, whatever he tells you to do, just do it. Right? Don't, but he's telling me that don't argue with him. He's the boss. He knows best, right? You can't be like that now in 2026, right? Now you have to listen to the voices in front of you, but that's hard, right? Because there isn't that strict hierarchy of knowledge within an organization, or wisdom within an organization that says, right, listen to your elders. They know best.
It's
Yeah.
funny that you mentioned hierarchy, because I was just thinking then as you said that, it was very much, I had it in hospitals where I trained, you know, the radiographers where I trained were the bosses and we were the students. And I remember very clearly being told, you're just a student, you can't do anything. And that was just a blanket, regardless of where you were in the structure, how you were. And I do find myself conflicted by it, because I guess because of my upbringing for various reasons, I believe in hierarchy because I think it works. Ultimately, I think you need someone disseminating information across the board. And I think I look at the military, and the military works for a reason and has done for hundreds of thousands of years. It's always been there. There has always been structure to society. What I think has changed, and the difference in what you're talking about there, is that communication within that hierarchy and that structure has very much flattened out. It's not that the hierarchy has, but the communication has. And it's much softer to understand that actually, your grunts, as it were, at the bottom of the ladder still need as much information as the person at the top. It's just how they accept that and take that information in that is so different. And when you talk about the neurodivergence piece, I think you're right. I think that has really stopped people from just giving a blanket label to everybody and trying to change that. And I think when I see people coming out of careers, that labeling, or lack of labeling, I should say, is where they start to struggle, because they've been stuck in a position where they only have a job title. The skills they have are there, but they've forgotten how to use them because they've just not had to do it. You meet somebody, you say, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm a radiographer." Now that has a huge amount of remit under it, but people just aren't used to expressing it. So I think one of the jobs that I do with my clients is trying to get those skills out of them to start with. And I think we spoke about it before off camera. We talked about imposter syndrome. And I know you're not a big fan of that. Can you just explain then how a clinical healthcare professional could come out of a role where they know lots, they're still trying to find their skills, but actually feel as if they are a bit of an imposter in this new world because they are not confined by the same constraints as they have been within an organization like the NHS?
It's interesting. Okay, so the imposter syndrome bit. Look, I believe everybody gets nervous when they do something new for the first time, or they're faced with something new for the first time. Does that make you an imposter in that situation? I think it's a very strong term for a start. And the reason I don't like it particularly is because I think if you constantly go back to what is it that I do know, and what is it that I have had training on, and what are the skills that I have got that I am sure about, then where's the imposter in that, right? So yes, we all find ourselves, and as you said, as we were talking about earlier, now in our lives, we're moving from career to career much, much quicker. We can expect a lot of people in the future to change career every 3 to 5 years. And so I can understand where, there's a narrative entering in there about people feeling imposter syndrome. And it's kind of feeds into that in a way, which is that, you're not staying in the same career for 30 years. So you've proved to yourself and to everybody else that you're the expert in that field because you've got the carriage clock. As any young people listening, you wouldn't even know what that is. You can Google it later. But, and I remember my dad getting his carriage clock when he left work because he'd been there for the entirety of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd say, are you actually an imposter? Or like all of us, and this is the other part of all of this, do you just now need to go back to learning some things, right? Because actually, if you see it as, well, here's the bedrock of what I do know. So I think everybody has to go back to that themselves. Here's the bedrock of what I do know and what I do know about myself. Where am I falling short? And that's actually not coming from a place of being an imposter. That's coming from a place of self-development and growth. where am I falling short skills wise that I would need to feel like I need to do that personal growth and development in order for my professional development to move forward. And you see, that's why I don't see the imposter syndrome in that. Even if you're in the middle of doing that growth, if you've got the plan for it, you understand where you sit. So you're not an imposter, you're just on a growth pathway. And I think in some ways, I think it's damaging for people to talk about that negative narrative of imposter syndrome. I think it's better to talk to people about, well, actually, we're just all on a journey of growth. And actually, there are certain new skills that you might need to pick up or go back on or recap on or etc. to take you forward in your career.
I agree. And I think as well, people have forgotten that self-learning and development is okay. Because certainly seeing people come out of healthcare, you have to do CPD and, you have to keep up with everything. But actually, that can be seen as a bit of a trial. Oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. It takes someone with real motivation to push on, do prescribing courses, do cannulation courses, do other, extensions of a role. So I think when you come out of it, you kind of go, oh, well, I don't have to learn anything because I already know what I've got. And I see the same from corporate as well. I don't think, you're not really encouraged necessarily to learn and develop yourself in corporate, because the more you learn and the more you do, that's when you could stray out of that system that we talked about earlier. And that's when you might leave. And we don't want people to leave. We want people to stay where they are. So I think it's that learning piece is so important to people. What's the best way for people to grow and develop their learning of communication?
I'll tell you what, it's not. It's not e-learning. I'm going to be quite frank about this. And there's other people that I could put you in touch with to come on and talk to you more about e-learning and the trials and tribulations of it. But you touched on it yourself there. Within any kind of medical setting, people have to do continual professional development. You have to do CPD and you have to show so many hours of verifiable CPD and whatever a year. But how much of that is actually good CPD, I would question. How much of it's actually progressing people? And let me say this, there is good e-learning out there, but there is an awful lot of bad e-learning out there. And part of the problem around it is the aims and objectives of what that's meant to be doing aren't being met. And organizations are going for, dare I say it, cheap routes of providing CPD, where, people are watching terrible little videos, cheating on the results of it, going to broken links that don't even work. Everybody's seen it. Everybody's done it. I think the best way to improve communication in a room is human to human, is to have those difficult conversations. And you have to create an environment of trust for that, right? So part of what I am doing with training, etc., within organizations is I see it's part of a cultural transformational shift within organizations. It sits into that area. It certainly doesn't sit into CPD in a way. It actually sits in that bigger space of how are we as an organization going to move forward? If we take it back to the basics, what is our massive transformational purpose as an organization? What are our objectives, our shared objectives as an organization? How are we going to reach those objectives? And part of that is, how do we change the communication within the organization? How do we change the narrative of this organization to encourage a better culture? When you were talking about the assessment piece earlier, I still find companies that are doing once a year sit down appraisals with their members of staff. How ridiculous, right? When you consider that we have alternatives now, like 360 continual feedback loops, right? where actually the manager, yes, I do believe in the hierarchy still, but I also believe that the title isn't everything, right? And I do believe that that title or that person sitting in that position also has responsibility for how effective they are in their communication. And that's why I think that developing that feedback, continual feedback, and that culture of trust is so important, because I'd want to know as a manager, am I being effective in helping you? Am I communicating well with you? And I want you to be honest with me. I don't want you to say, yes, sir, you're being brilliant at this. I want you to say, actually, you failed there. I didn't understand that. That made no sense to me whatsoever. Right? Because then I can change my behavior. You know, if we are trying to do this in higher education, yeah, where we would, you know, now, especially now the teaching excellence framework, the TEF framework is in place, and universities are being graded on how well they teach, right? We should be doing this in organizations as well. We should be saying as an organization, okay, how effective am I in my communication all the way down, right? Am I gold standard at this? And that has to come of partly out of self-reflection and making myself vulnerable to.
Yeah. I think that self-reflection is so critical in the communication with others. And if we just go back to the CPD part, actually, what we're really talking about is just tick box exercises, where I can remember in healthcare, we do group sessions. We've got to do CPD. We've got to get this done today. Right. Let's all sit down together and we'll just all tick off the same boxes. And there were instances as well where one person could do it and then print off the certificate and just change the name on the certificate.
Oh, my.
So I won't name names or hospitals or anything else, but it did happen. And I know it happens across the board. The problem with that is as you progress through management and to seniority, that means that your communication is flawed because you've only ever done it that way. And I think a lot of people, again, certainly in healthcare, find themselves promoted through the ranks through longevity, not through being a good communicator. And what's missed is that self-awareness. So when you say about a good boss or a good manager should be able to sit there and say, give it to me. Let me take it. I want to hear exactly what you think of me. They can't do it because they lack self-awareness about what they do anyway. So they don't want to hear how bad they are because they don't understand themselves. And I think that is endemic throughout so many organizations where people are just put in positions of authority without the proper training and the communication to allow them to disseminate that well. And I've had lots of bosses, and really there's only been a couple that have been good communicators and good at their job.
Yeah. Now, this is really interesting. As a little aside to that, I work with a number of people that deliver awareness training in a lot of different areas, whether it's neurodivergence or whether it's visual impairment, for example, or hearing impairment. And one of the things that I've been saying to all of those people is the problem is we shouldn't be trying to get those kind of awareness trainings into organizations first, right? Because they won't land properly with a lot of people. I strongly believe that the first bit of awareness training that should go in, there's two things. One should be on comms, because people pay me money for that. But the second bit should be around emotional intelligence. Because I honest to goodness believe you can't honestly take in properly any of that other awareness training if you haven't started working on your emotional intelligence first. How can I sit there and go, I'm going to understand how our business and the way we do our business and our culture impacts anybody with a visual impairment if I just don't give a damn? I've got to have the emotional intelligence to be able to deal with that and what that actually is going to mean, right? Unless we're in a place of reception of that, it isn't going to land. All that will happen is that then in itself, however good that training is, just becomes a tick box affair. We've had that. Yeah, we had someone in. They did all of the training on visual impairment. Yeah, thank you. We understood that fully. And we'll still be making people who are blind go round the outside of the building and up through that lift on the outside, which they can't find.
But it's okay because they've got the certificate to prove that they did the training and the course.
Exactly.
So that's fine. Job done.
Yeah. Yeah.
When do you think people become emotionally intelligent?
When something affects them normally, when it hits them. And then they suddenly realize, oh, I've actually been a bit mean on everybody else in the world. Do you think? I think normally it's at a point in your life where you've been made to face truths about, how your behavior is and how that impacts other people. Yeah, I think that's where it is.
Probably took my divorce to make it so for me. And I'm fascinated in it from a personal point of view, because I look back to the arrogant little shithead that I was at 23, leaving healthcare to go and work in a company with a company credit card and travel the world, and wasn't I dog's bollocks and amazing. And I just wanted job, title, money, more money. I wanted to rule the world. And it took, it's taken until now, 10 years ago, to really see that. What is hopeful for me, and I don't know how old your kids are, you said they're still in education, obviously some of the younger ones, is I listen to my daughter who is 15. And I think when she's not in teen brain, she is far more emotionally intelligent than I ever was up until about the age of 25, 30. And I think that gives hope for the way that things will change in the future and that people will be more inclusive, more understanding, and more emotionally aware of themselves and thus of everybody else.
I feel young people, a lot of people of our generation will say young people are troublesome, or they don't communicate very well. They communicate very differently. I think if you don't have kids, it's very difficult to understand that. I feel like people think, well, kids these days, they're glued to their phone. And, if you try and phone them, it's like, yeah, what? Yeah. Whereas we'd all happily have a conversation with our parents on the phone, and, you knew that if mum and dad phoned you had to, you had to tell them exactly what you want. Yeah, you had to talk. But they see more of the world as well. The internet has opened up, and comms has opened up the world. So they see more of the hurt and the pain and the difference, and they understand the global situation much more than we would have done as kids. They still hurt and feel like we did. They still have teenage tantrums like we did, etc. But in their own way, they're communicating a lot. It's just very different, and we have to understand that's different. So yeah, no, I feel that there is probably hope. But the other thing I think is that, especially for a lot of young people now, is that they probably will have lived through COVID, etc., and they at a young age, and I think they will be impacted by that. I think they will see that life is short.
Yeah. Absolutely. It definitely had an impact. And it goes back, it's the communication bit with them and the way they communicate being different. And she goes back to what you said right earlier on, where you said, we don't ask people how they prefer to communicate. I can't have a conversation with my kids on the phone. I get one-word answers if I'm lucky. If I WhatsApp them, I'm probably going to get more of a conversation. But they all use Snapchat, and it's all picture-based, and they do talk, and they have great relationships. And I've seen conversations. That's just the way they do it. And I think it's just trying to accept that and moving on. And I think we all have to, as we move and change, understand better ways to communicate and how to do that. I want to just touch then back on people who are leaving healthcare and how they communicate. Obviously, within healthcare, communication is probably quite structured. It can be quite pressured. There are a lot of instances within healthcare where there are hard things to discuss. Not always, sometimes it's very good news. So the skill of communication is there. How would you suggest people move that skill of communication from a very rigid structure over to something that they're doing on their own? If they're building their own business, obviously communication style is very different. How would you suggest that they make that transition?
By talking about it with the people that they're going to do business with. Okay. I think the first part of that is being very open and very honest about where you've come from and what communication pathway you've been in, right? And explain that to people. It goes back to what I say about people need to communicate about communication. So if that's where you've come from, you need to start by saying, this is where I come from. This is the land that I lived in. I almost went into a Genesis lyric there for a minute. The land of confusion. It's like it might be a good idea. But I think you need to communicate. This is where I came from. This is what communication used to look like for me. Now, tell me about what communication looks like for you where you're coming from. Yeah. And let's see what's actually useful to you in where I've come from communication from, which you're perhaps lacking. And then let me look at the way that you communicate and what I can learn from that. That's always the bridge. That's always the bridge for me. Have that conversation first about this is where I've come from. This is what communication looked like for me. What's your communication look like? Why do you communicate in the way that you do? Help me to understand that, right? And then let's talk about what you think was great about the way that we used to communicate in the NHS and what wasn't so good about it. And I'll be open and honest about it. And then you tell me what you think's good about the way you communicate and what's not good about it. And if we keep having those conversations, we will find really great ways to communicate between the two of us.
And that goes back, doesn't it, really, to that emotional intelligence, being able and honest to say, I can't get it right all the time. I come from a different background. How do we work through this together in order to move forward? What's the biggest mistake that you see with people and their communication when they move into a different sector?
It's the same mistake everybody makes with all communication. If I could give people one word to print on a t-shirt, wear all day long underneath, even if you have to wear smart clothes, you just wear it underneath, okay? Just to remind you, the one word is assumptions. Just drop the assumptions, right? Before you send out any comms, before you start any communication piece, just look at what it is and how it is that you're doing that communication and go, what of my assumptions are built into that? That piece that I'm about to send you, what am I assuming? That method that I'm using to send this, what am I assuming? Honest to goodness, if you can get that assumption piece right and you can stop with your assumptions and you start asking questions instead, right, you will, honest to goodness, do so much better, right? And it's little things. Like I said earlier about the Teams meeting thing. I work on a Mac. I don't have Microsoft Office. People send me Teams meetings invites. I can't get them, right? I have actually found a way, even in the last week, of actually using a couple of bits of tech to turn those into an ICS so that I can drop it into a thing. But the point is, the two platforms do not talk to each other. Right. And yet, when I have that conversation with companies that are using Teams, they go, oh, well, we assumed everybody has Teams. Why? Why? Why are you assuming? Why do you assume that everybody communicates in the same way? Well, I've dropped you an email on that. Hit this. I tell you what, just look at the space around calendar invites, because it's just so fascinating, even to the point where, like, when somebody says to you, "Oh, I'll send you a link to the meeting," okay? That can then be interpreted two ways. So sometimes if someone's going to send you a link to a meeting, they'll send you a Zoom link or whatever, right? But they will literally just send you a Zoom link. Now, what the person at the other end was hoping that you might do was actually send them a Zoom link, but also as part of an invite, which would go into your calendar to book out that time. Then the first person wonders why that person didn't turn up for the meeting. It's because that person lives a life where if it's not in their calendar, it doesn't exist. That's a comms piece right there. That's just a very, very small example. But if you think about how many times during the day we do all of those little comms pieces and assume, right? And then we wonder why we're chasing people around. We're going, why has that not happened? Why haven't they turned up? Why is it? It's because it wasn't received in the way you thought it was received. Yeah. And you didn't have a conversation about it first. You didn't say, what are the ground rules here with you? So yeah, drop the assumptions.
Absolutely fantastic lesson there for anyone coming out of an organization where you are so entrenched in the way you do it, and that absolute assumption that everybody does it the same way as you. Brilliant. I think that's it. That's the podcast right there, just summed up in that not assuming.
I think so. I must get some t-shirts made.
Please, put me down for one. Put me down for one. I want to finish up, but I do just want to touch on briefly AI and communication, because clearly that's where we are. AI is here. It's having a massive impact on communication, marketing, sales, everything down and throughout all pipelines, all organizations. How is it affecting the work that you do in communication?
It's really interesting, AI. My main concern with AI is that we're not thinking. That's my primary concern, is that we're not thinking, and then we're not putting people into the communication pipeline. And this is beginning to be seen in some quite public cases of this as well, where within organizations where information, etc., is important, we're seeing on the news situations where somebody has had information, they've used AI to generate a set of bullet points or whatever from that information. It's recorded part of a kid's TV program in the background. It's then gone back up. And as it's gone up to the top of the chain, somebody's gone, what on earth is this gobbledygook? Putting aside for 1 minute, how will AI impact jobs, right? Because it will impact jobs. It will change the nature of jobs. People will either lose jobs or they will need to skill into other jobs which are more suited to a human doing something that a human does better, which is building relationships, etc. So there's that whole piece. But putting that aside, my main concern with AI is that we don't just put AI out there as a tool without thinking about how it's impacting communication and without delivering boundaries and training on that AI. I've actually started partnering with someone who's a bit of an AI expert, and actually I've got building a little team of AI people as well, one to cover sort of GDPR regulations and stuff like that, but one to actually talk into the space about how we should be delivering training on AI as well, because that's where I think we've got the problem at the moment. It's where somebody just passes something to someone, doesn't give the person the time to spend to think about how they're going to use the tool. Let's call AI a tool. That's what it is. Think about how they're going to use that tool effectively, how they're going to then use the output from that tool effectively, put any kind of thinking or their own knowledge of human communication into it. And actually, we just end up with an AI talking to an AI, talking to an AI, talking to an AI. And ultimately, we pull humans out of the communication chain. That's where it's dangerous. We need to set clear boundaries. We need to say, okay, how is this handling our data? How is this impacting our communication? How are people using it in the organization? Do we need to provide them with more training on it so that actually we're getting the best use of it, not just letting them work it out for themselves? So the communication piece around AI is, are we communicating how we're using AI? And the answer generally is no at the moment. And that's a problem.
I think it will come in time. I think people will understand. And I'm a big believer, and I really do feel that it is clearly changing everything. But I do feel there is a place for it and that it will help people. And actually, that human connection and genuine human communication will outlive it and outweigh the dreadful AI communication that we have all seen on multiple platforms. I think we cannot lose that human touch.
To me, it's, as I say, it's like any other tool, right? Are you in charge of the tool, or is the tool just doing the work on its own, right? So where's the human input into that? I've got a spade in the garden that I can see from here. And if that spade could just dig the garden up and I left it to it, it might just make a complete mess of the garden because it wouldn't have any decent instruction as to which bits of the garden I wanted it to dig and which bits, to leave alone. And I might just go out and find the whole garden dug up, right? This is the same with AI. Are we setting the parameters for it and going, well, actually, the instruction here is I just want those weeds taken out. Thank you very much. So if you could go and do that while I'm busy over here watering these things, that would be brilliant. And then I'll come and check back and make sure that that's exactly what you've done and nothing else. And how's that going to impact anybody else that's in this area? So we have to set those ground rules, I think. And at the moment, I feel like we're just not quite there with the ground rules.
I love that analogy. And I think it's so good because it actually touches on something else. And it touches on the fun and the physical exercises with digging the garden. Communication is fun, and it's a skill, and it's an art. I think some people are naturally better at it than others, but it is fun to do. And if we take away all of that human contact, that fun, the physical exercise of communication, then I think we are really lost, and we end up with a garden and a road that is just dug by that automatic shovel.
I don't think we'll ever get there. I truly believe that we won't get there. And I think one of the things that will save us are the creators, the artists of this world, the people that understand that we are more than just workers, which is why, it's so important that we invest money in, here I'll be slightly political at the end, but it's why it's so important that we invest money in the arts, right?
Absolutely.
It really is important. We need to stop thinking, well, these artists over here, these people that, just produce music or art or whatever, do we really need them in society? We could just produce it with AI or whatever. No. You asked earlier about, the emotional intelligence side. How many people actually get some of that emotional intelligence because of the arts? The arts help us understand bits of ourselves that we don't have words for.
Right back to the beginning, talking about music and actually listening and hearing that music and understanding the complexities behind it and the emotions that it brings out through everything that it produces. So I'm in absolute agreement with you. And I think human connection is vital. Human connection, human communication will always be there, and it will outlive everything else.
I think so too.
Graham, thank you so much for your time. I could talk for ages. Communication and the work that you do is absolutely fascinating, and I know we've got more work to do, offline as well together. And I think it's so exciting to hear the work that you do, the way in which you communicate, and the thoughts you have behind it. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. And I wish you all the very best for the rest of 2026.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me some time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye for now.